Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Fabian Arroyo Rocas, and this is my colleague and friend Rio Watanabe. We are both doctoral candidates at The Ohio State University in the program of adaptive physical education. Today, we are going to be presenting to you qualitative research methods and analysis. So we want to give you an overview of different strategies that you can be utilizing if you will be performing qualitative research. We are both highly interested in this methodology. We believe that knowing about a person's experiences and knowing social phenomena in their own natural context, we believe that is important, especially with marginalized populations such as persons with disabilities. So we want to get this started, and we would like to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today. First, we are going to give you briefly an overview of what qualitative research is. We will talk about theoretical frameworks because this gives the rigor to the study, and we believe this is important. We'll give you some insights on a few theoretical frameworks that have been used or could potentially be used by you. We also have some research designs that we think they are important to know, which each one of them have different characteristics, and these are ways that you can go about and know certain phenomena that depending on the purpose of your study or the research questions that you might have. We will also cover some data collection strategy that we believe they are important to know, especially with qualitative research. And in terms of analysis, we will cover some basic analysis and specifically thematic analysis. That's a foundational strategy for you to have. And we believe this is a basic strategy that all of us should know in terms of qualitative research. And then at last, we are going to disseminate some research. We have two pieces of work that we think they are important to highlight the different pieces that we have covered throughout the presentation. My colleague and I will be doing one piece each, so you can have an insight on how people went, how the researchers went about to know certain social phenomena. So what is qualitative research? One of the things that we have learned while our time here at Ohio State is that qualitative research is definitely linked to our experiences and identity. It's very important to know who you are, where you've been, what you have become in the present time, where you want to go. And we believe those experiences can shape who we are as researchers. For example, Rio and I, we are both foreigners. Both of us were born in different countries. So we bring a set of experiences from outside the United States. And we have been in the US for such a long time now that we have also experiences here as foreigners, but now also we have become part of the culture. We also believe that our identities, how we identify in different areas, can also shape our thinking and how we go about to know certain things, or even the things that we are interested in terms of research. It's very important that we want to know social phenomena, what is happening. If you have a research question that you are interested about, let's say you are interested in the experiences of persons with disabilities in either physical education or maybe physical activity context. Well, when you utilize qualitative research, you want to go and know what is happening in a naturalistic way, meaning how it actually happens in that particular context. You're not trying to measure things, but in many times you're trying to describe or perhaps understand how people make sense of the world and how make sense of their realities. Therefore, we actually believe that as an ontological essence, we believe that there might be different realities. So people construct their realities depending on the social, cultural context that they are in. For example, we believe that disability can be experienced very different compared between the US and maybe the global South, any country in the global South. the experience of disability can have different meaning, and it can be lived through our bodies in a very different way depending on the context. So that's what's really interesting about qualitative research, because you go to know about this person's experiences and the social world that they're in, with the high influence of culture, and their social, their beliefs, their interaction with other people, their interaction with themselves. Therefore, we think that knowledge is constructed as opposed to quantitative research, where you go and discover the knowledge, meaning that knowledge has always been there, and you go discover this. We believe through a qualitative research lens, or through a qualitative paradigm particularly, that knowledge is actually constructed, and that can be constructed very different depending on the social cultural context that we are in. So that's a very simple overview of qualitative research. We highly suggest that you might read Patton 2015 Qualitative Research Methods. That's definitely a good basic book for you to have in terms of knowing more about qualitative research. Secondly, what is methodology? We are constantly hearing this word and this concept, and basically it's how you go about to know a certain phenomenon. It's about those strategies that you're utilizing to get to know certain things, certain questions that you might have. And we actually believe that these strategies, they must be supported by a theoretical framework. And as I mentioned before, we are going to cover a set of different theories that we might use in this context. We are going to be covering a set of 4 different theories that we believe they are going to be helpful to you. And also the research design. What's the strategy? What is it that you want to know about? Is it about culture? Do you want to know about the social cultural context of people? Do you want to know about their experiences? Do you just want to describe a certain phenomenon? Do you want to know about their life history? It depends on what is it that you want to know, the different approach and the different design that you might be deciding to choose, because each design might have a different approach, and there are different strategies to go and collect data, and different strategies to go and analyze this data as well. So as I mentioned, theoretical frameworks are important. And what is it? Well, a theory is basically a set of ideas and beliefs that help explain social phenomena. It's about these lenses that you're going to utilize to understand a particular phenomenon. Some of the theories that we know of, but this is not limited to this 4. There are many other theories. So this is really important that you become familiar with these theories. We believe that one way to know more about theories is actually reading research or reading similar research that you might be interested in. And those pieces of work might give you a really good idea of what theories are out there to know certain phenomena. And from there, you can start deciding what theories are actually a better fit in this case to understand whatever you are researching. There are 4 theories that we are going to be covering today. The first one is intersectionality. We will cover contact theory, constructionism. In other cases, it's also known as social constructionism. And we will also cover the socio-ecological model. So intersectionality. Probably some of you are familiar with this concept. And intersectionality has become popular, particularly from the 90s. Although it started as a metaphor, meaning that it was something's idea to understand how particularly Black females experience work in different environments as females, but also as Black persons. So whenever she intersected these 2 identities, meaning race and gender, these 2 intersections can have different meanings, can have different oppressions on how you experience certain things. So it's about understanding how multiple social identities, such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, and for example, disability also, they intersect at the micro level of individual experience to reflect interlocking systems of privilege and oppression. Here you see a piece of work that we decided that it was important to have. And we are going to be disseminating this work later on, but some insights here about intersectionality. Here, the authors are trying to understand or perhaps explore how males with visual impairments they experience physical education. So through a phenomenological lens, we will explain what phenomenology is in a little bit. But they are trying to know and understand their experiences as males and females. So there you see the two identities intersecting, which is gender and race as well. And also, sorry, the disability and gender are intersected to understand how they experience, in this case, physical education. Like I said, we will disseminate this work in a little bit so you can actually see what theories they use, the purpose of the study, what data collection strategies they actually utilize as well, and some of the results that they found about the intersection of these two identities. We also have contact theory. Contact theory has been a theory that's been around for quite some time now, at least from the 60s. And basically it's about how one person can interact with other individuals, pay attention to those differences. And whenever you understand and you pay attention to those differences, it tends to produce some form of change in our attitudes. So for example, in this piece that you can see here, it's about how undergraduate students, they go to, or children without disabilities have contact with persons with disabilities. And through the contact theory lens, they actually, they get to experience what this person with disabilities might experience to a degree. So through this contact theory, it's believed that through this change, it needs to happen in some time. It's something that doesn't happen right away, or it's a one-time opportunity. It's something that happens over time. So you might be thinking about maybe a semester, half of a semester, but only just a few sessions. It's kind of hard to understand if there is any change in attitudes. So this theory helps to understand how these persons might change or not their attitudes towards persons with disabilities in this case. So that's another theory that has been used. In other cases, we've seen it with undergraduate students also that go and interact with persons with disabilities. If you have an internship or so, and you go and work with persons with disabilities face-to-face, in person, in some cases, they have analyzed how those attitudes change over time when working with this individual. So social constructionism or constructionism, basically what it is it understands that realities are constructed differently. Persons construct their knowledge, and you can construct concepts differently depending on your experiences, depending on your language, depending on your culture. So it's very mobile and flexible in terms of how you construct things, how you make sense of the world. And particularly, I am using this theoretical framework in my own doctoral thesis at this point, or dissertation. I'm utilizing this theoretical framework to understand how persons in physical education, teacher education programs understand or what perspectives they have in terms of inclusion. The literature now suggests that inclusion is a subjective experience. It's a temporary, it's not something permanent. Some people might experience inclusion, others might not. It's beyond integration. So I do want to understand how these programs, particularly in the Global South, understand what inclusion is. So the lens I'm utilizing to understand that is constructionism. And the reason why is, well, I'm exploring this concept in a different context, in a different country, with a different language. So people have different beliefs and cultures and customs. So how they might construct inclusion might be very different to the way we see it nowadays here in the United States, for example. So in this piece here, we see how through the theoretical framework of social constructionism, what are the perspectives of general education, physical education teachers about teaching in physical education or inclusive physical educations, or perhaps teaching individuals with disabilities. You will see that though the way those people or these teachers construct that kind of knowledge might be very, very different if you never had any experience working with individuals with disabilities. So we think that this is a good piece of work that you can have access to, and then you can understand more about this theoretical framework. If you're interested in understanding how people make sense of things or construct different concepts, this might be a good theoretical lens for you to have.
Okay, so hi, my name is Arroyo Watanabe speaking here. Let's talk about socio-ecological model. This model actually divides the social environment into systematic levels that can bring attention to different levels of types of social influences. It is started off as an ecological model that the Brenner stated that people's behavior are shaped depending on the other contexts in the model, and multiple levels of influences exist, but also levels are interactive and reinforcing, which means that each level of the social environment does bidirectional inferences to each other. Those division could be individual, interpersonal, organizational, community, and public policy wise. Although those divisions are existed, each of them are bidirectionally, meaning both ways are interacting to each other to shape and form humans' behavior. So this article, Parents' Perspective of Physical Activity in their adult children with autism spectrum disorder. They utilize a social ecological approach. The purpose of the study was to investigate parents' perception of physical activity engagement of their children with autism spectrum disorder. So through the lens of socio-ecological model, they found that the intrapersonal and interpersonal, so intrapersonal meaning whatever that's within themselves, and interpersonal relationship with the other people and community factors are essential for the individual on the autism spectrum to engage in physical activity. So, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we will cover now research designs. These are some of the strategies and methods that will help you understand what is it that you're trying to find out or trying to understand more than anything. So we have a couple of examples here. We will cover some of them later on. We will not cover every single one of them, but at least we're throwing this out to you because we believe it's important for you to have some of this information. So we will cover descriptive qualitative, which is one of the most basic forms of qualitative research, especially if you want to try and stay at the descriptive level, just kind of touching the surfaces of things, trying to understand certain things, especially with those things that haven't been explored too much. You can utilize these strategies to know and start describing certain phenomena. And we will provide some examples as well. We will go over case studies, phenomenology, ethnography, and we also have another form, which is narrative inquiry. We will not cover this one in this presentation, but this is about persons' life experiences, and it's very oriented towards individual work, towards if you want to, for example, in the case of disability, if you want to know how a para-athlete understand their performance, for example, as an athlete, but a person with a disability, how they have made sense, how they got there. Narrative inquiry could be a good opportunity to understand that. If you want to know their experience, maybe that could be related to a different strategy, but we will cover this now. As I mentioned before, descriptive qualitative is the most basic form of research or qualitative research. And it's about recognizing the subjective nature of the problem and the different experiences participants might have. So you might have a bigger sample here, meaning more participants to understand certain aspects of the research question that you are exploring. And as I mentioned, it's basic because it describes. You're not interested in knowing how that experience happened or in what social cultural context it happened before, or how this person got to where they are now. You are describing the phenomenon as it is in the place at that very moment. So you are not going in a retrospective way, neither you're trying to project things in the future. You're just trying to keep things in the present time and describing it as it is in that particular moment. Case studies is different. In case studies, they are trying to capture and construct an in-depth picture of a bounded unit. In some cases, what I mean by unit, they can be, you're trying to understand, for example, how, for example, Rio and I are working on a study on elementary school principals, and we want to know what the perspectives are of these principles in terms of inclusion. What are the perspectives, how they are constructed? So we're utilizing a case study because we are exploring different schools in this case. Those different schools, they all form a case study. Now, if we went about to go find out different schools separately, we want to compare them. Each school in this case will be a case study, but that's not the case for us. We're looking at a whole picture as a whole unit. Can you do it individually? Absolutely. But in this case, we're looking at something as a unit which includes more than one school in this case. Other units could be universities, could be classrooms. In some cases, they could be gyms, if that's your interest. They can be recreational centers as well. They can be community centers. There could be some corporate offices. Those are case units in terms of case studies that you can explore as a whole, but they are very specific. You're not trying to understand a whole country, although it could be a case study, but in this case, you're trying to be specific with a different organization, and that could be your unit that you want to explore. Ethnography, in this case, this is one of the most extensive research designs in terms of the time that you are going to spend out in the field. Basically, what it does is about studying and understanding socio-cultural contexts, processes, and the meanings constructed in human cultural systems. One of the things that comes to mind right now, it was a female researcher in Australia that went to a boys-only school, and she wanted to understand how boys understand or make sense of physical education in their context by having a female working with them. So she went into the school and she spent the entire semester going into the physical education classes only and shared with them in class. So she participating in these classes. So in this piece of work, you will see that how things started to change and she started to make sense of things. And as you read this paper, you will see that this person over time, she starts to be less noticeable in the culture or in the social cultural context right there in the school. And so she was able to be more of an observer. She was trying to describe different relationships within the school, different perceptions that these boys have in terms of the researcher or her as a female inserted in this context. But one of the key pieces here is about the time spent in the context that you are exploring. This is less seen in, for example, in adaptive physical education or adaptive physical activity. There is very little ethnographies done because most likely we will think that it has to do with time and the cost it might have spending so much time. But this is really necessary to understand, for example, special schools. We don't really know much about physical education in special schools. And ethnography could be a really good opportunity to understand how these people make sense in those contexts. Phenomenology in this case is highly interested in the experiences, but not just the experience on its own, in the essence of the experience, how these people live certain phenomena. In the piece of work that I want to disseminate later on, we will see that they utilize phenomenology and why it was important in this case.
Okay, so speaking of qualitative data collection, now we know how to set up the study. We have to talk about how do we collect the data in a qualitative way. So there are, although those 3 bullet points are one of the most famous, and there are a lot more different type of data collection strategies, but today we'll just focus on interviews, observations, and artifacts of written document. Interview, as you can kind of imagine, talking to somebody in person or on the Zoom. It could be done either unstructured, semi-structured, structure. We'll talk about that in a detail a little bit. Observation, as Fabian was talking about, ethnographic approach, they use a lot of observation time. And artifacts or written document. It could be something that is not being talked in person speaking data collection, but you can actually look at some of the written documents or artifacts to collect data collection as well. So let's move on to the next slide. So interviews, it could be done a lot of different ways. It could be done in person way or group interviews that you can do as a whole group or even focus group. You can talk to somebody in person, or nowadays we have this whole good technology of Zoom online meetings. So it could be done in a multiple way. So there are 3 different types of interviews. One is unstructured, semi-structured, and structured. So let's start talking about the unstructured. Unstructured, as it means, there is no predetermined questions or wording, and question emerge from the immediate context. And it is spontaneous and most loosely structured among the other 2 formats of interview, which is semi-structured and structured. So they'll just have one little topic and they just go with the flow and get everything they can within their time frame and emerge from the immediate context. Mostly, I think a lot of time people utilizes semi-structured interview. For my dissertation topic as well, I am utilizing semi-structured, which means the topics and issue to be covered are specified in advance as an outline. So as a researcher, we already find we kind of put out some of the questions that we want to ask, but the interviewer can decide the sequence and the wording of the question depending on how the interview is flowing. So depend on that day, if the participant the research participants are talking about something really in detailed, interesting, you are allowed to move on to that topic and ask a little bit deeper. That's why it's called semi-structured. There are some structures, but also you have a flow. You are allowed to go with the flow as well. And lastly, it is structured. There are similar to a questionnaire, basically asking how old are you, where are you living, what's your experiences, or how many years have you been working. It is really similar to those demographic questionnaire, aiming to get a very superficial level response. So sometimes we do need to ask those questions as a part of our demographic collection or something like that. But those are really used to get not too in-depth, but we kind of expect them to have a solid answer on these. And next slide would be the observation. Yes, so observation, as Fabian kind of touched on it a little bit, observation is basically focusing on what is seen by the researcher without asking specific question or intervening on any variable. Comparing to the interview, you are not actually physically going in there asking what's going on, but instead you kind of sit back and watch what they're doing. It is interesting that getting closer to the events and the situation make it possible for researchers to document or even reviewing, analyze what occurs, people act in context. And then also you can utilize different set of collection status. You can do it at real-time recording, or you can also utilize video recordings. And if you use a video recording, that's really good because it allows researchers to understand what is said and done when language is input context. So you can see a little bit bigger picture and you can reflect back more. Observation can be undertaken with the observer as a participant or non-participant in the setting. So for example, if you are in the classroom setting, you can just observe the classroom as observer, meaning that there is a line that people can tell you, I'm observing you, versus they are observing as participant in the classroom. So during the qualitative observation, the research can take one of four main roles. Basically, are you doing it as a participant? Are you doing it as an observer? Also, are you going to tell that person that you're participating? And are you not going to tell the person that you're participating? So those two different types you can mix and match. But also, you have to think about the ethical consideration part. When you become a complete participant, which means you are not telling the research participants that you are participating in this research, but you're just blending in, basically undercovering research. It could be face a lot of ethical consideration on that, because where the researcher conceals the role and the researcher becomes a member of the group being studied, sometime when we're going through the research processes, you need to make sure that participants are able to say, no, I don't want to participate in research. But when you do undercover research, something like this, they don't allow the time for them to say, I don't want to be studied. I don't want to involve in themselves in study. So that's something that you can think of when you're doing the observational studies. And lastly, quantitatively observation or qualitative observation. Observational study can be done both in nature of investigating questions that you have. So for example, in a quantitative way, frequency of social interaction among students with and without disability within PE setting can be counted. However, the qualitative, it could be observing PE teachers assist and speak to students with disabilities. And this is pretty much researcher's choice to have qualitative way or quantitative way. And also, as well as where do you want to position yourself as a researcher and using the technology. So there's a various way you can utilize this as well. Yeah. And lastly, artifact or written documents. The artifacts and written documents are there to create a basis for more in-depth data collection, and various techniques can be used. Artifact in general, it is implying any object made by humans or natural object that can be handled and touched. So it's something that participant can be bringing that something meaning to them, so they can show it and see if that to talk about that artifact. Or even written document, as you can read on this one, any form of written document is a written document. Enable researchers to obtain the words of participants and use their language. How are they framing their words in the written document? That could be personal journals, letters, or email, something really, really personal, or something more official, an outside word, official report, Facebook posting. Nowadays, we have Instagram, Twitter, all the other social media could be their part of written documents as well.
Okay, now I am unmuted. So we are going to be going into the last few parts of these presentations, and we're going to touch base on analysis. So in analysis, in a very general way to understand it, it is finding ways to reduce and identify pieces of information that are consistent. They're similar or different, and through a theoretical lens, as we have spoken before, how those pieces relate to respond the research question that you are asking. Obviously, this step is happening after all your data has been collected, either through interviews, through observations, through written document, through pictures potentially too, or a combination of things. And then you start to analyze these different forms of data that you have obtained. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we are going to be covering thematic analysis as we think it's a foundational strategy for you to have and to do in terms of qualitative research. This is very common nowadays, although it's a fairly new strategy. It started in 2006, and more recently, Brown and Clark, they have a new book with thematic analysis, which have a very practical way for you to have, and it's a brand new book, and we don't sell this book, but we believe this is a good thing to have. So it in terms of thematic analysis, it's about it helps the researchers identify, analyze, and report patterns. So meaning pieces of information that might be similar, but remember, every time that you are analyzing through a theoretical lens. So if you're looking at through an intersectionality lens, you're looking at different things that identities or positionalities are intersecting. Maybe things that they're mentioning about race with disability, or gender and disability, or maybe race and gender, or maybe socioeconomic status with gender. So if you're intersecting not just two, you can intersect more than two identities, in fact. But how you are analyzing and reporting these patterns across the entire data. It's not just individual, although you code individually, we will see that in just a second, but you're looking at an overall picture across your data. What is a theme? Thematic, we're talking about themes. So what is a theme? A theme captures something important. It's about the data in relation to the research questions, and it represents some level of pattern, response, or meaning within the data set. So it's something that really represents something that you believe as a researcher through your interpretation and through the theoretical lens and the purpose of the study. This is something that captures important in response to that question. So whenever you cross the patterns or cross these themes, do they individually might be different, but whenever you put them together and you cross them each other, you can actually find a response, not necessarily a response, but it helps explain the research question that you have originally. So these are some steps for you to have whenever you are performing thematic analysis. These steps are not ours, and that's important to mention. These steps are mentioned, let me go back, in this Brown and Clark 2006. They are more in depth into the Brown and Clark 2022, but these are really good basic steps for you to have, and you can actually print this and maybe have it if you're performing this type of analysis. First, familiarize yourself with your data. Even though you perform the interview, for example, don't think that just because of listening to this person, you have enough information. You have to read and read and read this data over and over. Take notes while you're doing the interview. Do some memoing. If you have a reflection on some kind of idea this person had, go write it down. And whenever you write it down, don't just leave it. Go familiarize yourself later on and always read what your participants are giving you. Remember, this is about representing their voice, not your voice. Number two, start generating initial codes, meaning you can extract segments, it can be words, sentences, you can use color. It's completely up to your own creativity, but start extracting codes. They can have different meanings for you at first, but in the following step, which is number 3, this individual codes, you can start bringing them in together and grouping them. So whenever you start grouping them, you will see that you can start generating some themes that kind of relate. That's why I said pieces of information can be different, but at the same time could be similar at the end of the day. After you have grouping them and you have kind of start searching for themes, you want to review them again. So you always kind of, this is a process that goes back and forth constantly. You're always doing something and reviewing, doing something and reviewing. And lastly, you want to be defining and naming your themes. Whenever you are grouping them, you have gone through this process a couple of times or more than a couple of times. You start defining and naming these themes with something that will actually represent what your research actually is. And then you will produce your report. In this process, you can have a second author doing the same thing in a parallel way, or you can actually, what we've seen is first author sometimes does it, and the second author then goes and review the process. That's another way you can do this thematic analysis. So we are getting to the final piece here. And in this piece, what we want to do is disseminate this, these two pieces of work, and Rio will have the first part.
Yeah, so speaking of some of the data collection strategy, I thought I wanted to talk about this literature piece that's experiences of children with autism spectrum disorder in adaptive physical education done by Blake. The purpose of study, this is the left one over here. The purpose of the study was to understand the experience of middle school children with autism spectrum disorder between 10 years old to 14 years old receiving adaptive physical education. This was really interesting and meaningful piece to me because they utilized three types of data collection strategy to gain depth of their experiences of phenomenological study, which one of them were drawing about the participants' experience in APE. So as we talk about the artifacts and written document that was part of it, they also had some of the structured, semi-structured interviews and observation done by the researcher. So all of the three data collection strategy was used in one single study. And by utilizing drawings from the participants, the researchers and colleagues were able to seek their signs of motion during their adaptive physical education setting. And children with the autism spectrum disorder were able to communicate their experiences in adaptive physical education setting services and barriers and facilitators that exist in the classroom instruction and transferred to the skill learned into everyday movement experiences. So that was very nicely laid it out that drawing from the children, also observing the children to action in the classroom, as well as interviewing them. Three data collection strategy was utilized, and this was also a phenomenological study. So, yeah.
Okay, and lastly, we also have a second piece that's also phenomenological, but it was done a little bit different. So the purpose of the study was through an intersectional approach or intersectionality lens, as a theory, they wanted to examine the experiences of males and they had a visual impairment. So they phone interview, all the interviews were performed through telephone, and they interviewed 6 different adults and who identified themselves as males with visual impairments. Although they didn't use thematic analysis, they did use a form of phenomenological analysis, which is a different step. If you want to read more about it, again, Patton, it's a good way, and Smith, 2019, it's also another form of phenomenological analysis. In the overall picture, after doing the analysis, getting the interviews of these adults that were males, identified as males with visual impairments, they understood or they examined that these experiences were quite negative in physical education context, these persons felt isolated within the class. In many cases, they self-excluded from physical education. We don't know if these experiences might have a long-term effect. This is just exploring those experiences in general. These persons understood that their disability minimized them as individuals and dehumanized their experiences within those contexts. So this is something that we don't know enough. This was just done in the context of the United States, particularly on the East Coast of the United States. We just don't know how these experiences might be different in the West Coast, as where you are right now, if these experiences might be different in the South or perhaps other countries. There's very much to do, and these are just two pieces of work where they utilize different theoretical frameworks, designs, and forms of data collection. And lastly, a quick summary here. Remember, qualitative research, it relates to your experiences and identities. Who you are, it's important because who you are also kind of tells us what is it that you want to find out, what is it that you want to know about more. The designs, every research design is related to explain phenomena in a naturalistic way. We want to know about their experiences in those contexts. This is not about me as a researcher getting to be known about this. It's about capturing their voice and just being a bridge to tell their stories to somebody else. And lastly, thematic analysis, we highly encourage you that you know about this strategy because it's a very foundational strategy, even to perform, for example, a phenomenological analysis later on. So these are the 3 key points that we think are important. If you ever have any questions, or if you have questions about this presentation, we would love to talk to you. These are our emails. Please send us an email. We would love to talk to you. We can always set up a Zoom chat or something, and we can have a nice conversation about qualitative research. Thank you so much. Thank you to my friend Rio also. And hopefully we will see you someday. Bye-bye.
Bye.